Welcome to the podcast where mental health is at the core of what we focus on. We strive to develop people like you to maximize who you are and what you've been called to do by sharing tools and resources for better brain health. And now here's your host, Juan Garcia.
Hey, welcome back to the podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. We focus on mental health and peak performance, and we are in the middle of a series entitled Untangling Relationships. And we've been talking about different codependency traits that get us all tangled up as it relates to relationships. And this is not just romantic relationships, this is any type of relationship that we develop. And it shows up. All of the codependency traits, the unhealthy, different types of ways that we cope, they show up in our relationships when we don't identify those root causes, which are usually connected to dysfunction in the family home, in the family unit that we grew up in. And that could be two parents, one parent, a foster home, an adoptive family. It doesn't really matter what the source is, but that's usually the unit in which the dysfunction occurs, and it develops into a coping mechanism of sorts that becomes normal. And when we normalize dysfunction, then it really does show up in a very negative way, an unhealthy way. It rears its ugly head, and we have to deal with it as it relates to our lives. It affects our jobs, it affects our ability to cope in a healthy way, it affects the way we parent when we have children, it affects our relationships, obviously, with our spouses, with our parents, with our in-laws, at work. I mean, it just goes on and on and on and on. And this is why this series is so important, that we really make sure that we're identifying unhealthy ways of coping and how it shows up in our relationships. And this episode specifically, we want to focus on the tendency to either be controlled or be controlling. This is definitely a codependency trait that shows up in relationships. We either want to be controlled or we want to be controlling. And now, before you make your comments or think to yourself, whatever you're thinking right now, I'm sure many of you are probably thinking, I could be wrong, but many of you are probably thinking, who wants to be controlled? I mean, that's just silly. Well, there are a lot of people that are being controlled, and it's not that they want to be controlled. It's not something they volunteer for. It's just that the way they've learned how to cope in relationships because of the way they feel, right? Because emotions, that's where we get a lot of this driving of the bus, if you will, of how we cope. It's overwhelming, and so they allow, or the word is tolerate, a lot of unhealthy behavior from those that are close to them, and they are controlled. And it's not just mainly a yes sir, yes ma'am type of control. It's just motivated by guilt. When someone is guilted, and that guilt works, and it works in their mind, and it works in their hearts, and they're constantly feeling bad, the individual that's guilting them is using that tactic to get outcomes or get results from the person. And the receiving end of it, the person that's receiving this, is tolerating control. The problem is they don't see it as being controlled. They just see it as they feel bad and they want to make the person happy and they want to please them, and so they rather just do or comply. And that's where the unhealth comes in. That's where the codependency comes in, because the person, when you become codependent on being motivated by guilt to do or comply or to tolerate what you're being asked to do. And guilt is never a healthy motivator. I had I was having a conversation with someone, and they were pushing back, and they were saying guilt is not a good motivator. Guilt is never a good motivator. And they kept asking me, well, you're a father, how do you get your kids to do what you ask? And I said, well, you don't guilt them. And if I ever done, which I probably have in the past when they were younger, but if I did, it was not good. It was not healthy. It was not a good motivator, because guilt develops this sense of unworthiness in an individual, that it is never good enough, that anything that they can do will never suffice. And so you may get what you want out of them, but at the end of the day, they feel guilty, and that's not a healthy motivator. What you want to be a motivation for people to do what is required is love. Love is the best and healthiest motivator for individuals to do what they're supposed to do. Love, integrity, discipline, those are good motivators. You do things because they're right. You do things because they're your responsibility, not because you're guilted. So those are the ones that are being controlled. And then the others that like to be controlling, basically guilt is also a motivation for them, because they feel bad that things are not potentially going to go the way they want, and so they feel the need to control. And so the guilt that they display in that is that if they don't allow themselves to control, or they allow somebody else to try to control, and it doesn't go the way they think it should go, then that's where the guilt comes in, and then that's where they beat themselves up, and they subscribe to the false belief that it's not good enough. And a lot of people that control are usually perfectionistic in nature. They have perfectionism driving their bus, which is connected to pride. Because pride says, everything that needs to be done in this thing, I have, I can offer, I can do, I can be. And it doesn't allow anyone else to chime in to be part of the solution, be part or be a resource to whatever is happening, because perfectionism is all about what I can do completely and how I do it right, and no one else does it the way I do it. Again, these are not thoughts that automatically come up to people or in people's heads. And this is why I'm doing this series, because a lot of people think that these issues, codependency traits, and unhealthy ways of coping just are identified so easily. No, they are so interwoven into who we are and our development and our character that we don't realize that these are the motivators, these are the driving forces behind our behavior. So we have to identify, are we being controlled in a codependent way and allowing it and tolerating it, and are we controlling in a codependent way where we're trying to reach perfectionism in a way that's unrealistic? And there's patterns, because this obviously with time can become abusive. You have things like OCD that develop out of the need to be controlling, because things have to be a certain way. They're basically it's OCD comes in a form of structure, and a person that struggles with OCD is basically being motivated by this structure that cannot be changed. And the structure could be specifically their thought pattern, their thought process. The structure could be physical things that they do that have to be done in order for the next step to be allowed to happen. Or it could just be specific behaviors that have to be done a certain way in a certain timing. And the reason why this is negative is because it controls their lives. And so they're being controlling in a sense, but actually they're also being controlled at the same time, because if things are not the way they think they're supposed to be, then there's no moving forward in a healthy way. And so all of these things happen because of codependency traits that we develop, because of the way we were either expected to live when we were children, we were still developing. And this is why it goes back to childhood, because when you're a child, you're still being formed. You're still developing. You're still learning. You're still growing. You're still adjusting to environment, to love, to nature, to nurture, all of these elements that make you who you are. And if those are not healthy, then that's where we adapt coping mechanisms and we develop defensive mechanisms and all these ways of surviving. Because ultimately, God made us in ways where we have what it takes to overcome, to thrive, to survive, to be better, because that's how God made us. He made us according to his image, and he is a God that gets things done. And so when elements in life get in our way and become an impediment of our growth, of our development, we find ways to get things done. The issue is that we are sinful in nature, and so a lot of the ways that we choose can potentially be sinful in nature, which are things like pride, jealousy, anger, unhealthy anger that is not well balanced, and those become the motivators, and so we guilt people or we move because we're guilted, and all of these different elements now are the ones that are driving the bus, as I like to say, in life, where now we are living this life codependently. So, some patterns that I want to share with you that come up a lot as it relates to this control topic. And a big one, which I identify as a false belief, is that I cannot be wrong. I am afraid to be wrong. That's a big one. This has to do with a person's sense of competency. If you look at my videos of temperaments, you'll see that there are specific temperaments. One stands out for me, the melancholy temperament. That competency is a big part of who they are. And so when they feel that things are not lined up a certain way, or that their sense of intelligence is being questioned, they stress, and so the negative or the weaknesses of their temperament rises up to the challenge, and it's usually unhealthy. So when someone is trying to control, they're doing it perhaps in ways that one of the patterns that we see is that they cannot be wrong. And another one is, I have to be right. So one is, I can't be wrong, and another one is, I have to be right. And they are different, because one is focusing on not getting things wrong, and the other one is only focusing on, well, I'm right, and I have the last word. And they're both prideful in nature. And these are patterns that we have to identify. And there's a whole workbook that we can work. If you, for example, if you were to come to my office and ask for a consult or want to start therapy, you identify codependency in your life, and it's affecting everything, whether it's your job, as I said earlier, your relationships with your family, your spouse, your children, your in-laws, etc. There are ways that we can identify these things, kind of get to the root causes of where they came from, see your temperament and how that's affecting your temperament, your natural innate wiring, and help you navigate this in a healthy way. And this is the passion that I have for what I do, because I want to help people get out of this funk, get out of this codependency that controls people's lives. And there's hope. There's hope, there's therapy, there's counseling, there's the person of Jesus Christ that can be enthroned in your life and help you navigate this, because he created you, and he knows how you're wired, and he knows where certain things are missing. And obviously, if he's missing in your life, that's a big hole in any of our lives. And once he's in your life, the rest, there are resources that he has provided that we can navigate so that you can live a life that's codependency free. We're going to continue this series. There's a whole bunch of stuff that I still want to share with you, but if you have not seen the other episodes, go ahead and do that. We talked about a distorted sense of responsibility in the last episode, and then previous to that, we talked about this lack of objectivity. So they're good episodes in nature, so please go ahead, If you haven't subscribed, please do so. Like, comment, share this video. Let the algorithm know that we're trying to get people free from codependency so that people are aware and that we can all be mindful of our mental health. So stay tuned, and hopefully I'll see you on the other episode.
Thank you for tuning into our podcast. For more information, visit our website at juangarciaenterprises.com. Our host, Juan Garcia, is available for speaking, coaching, and one-on-one counseling. You can email us at info@juangarciaenterprises.com. Until next time, remember, we only have one mind, so mind yours.